Welcome back. This has been yet another week in which extreme climate and weather events have continued to headline the news. From the apocalyptic wildfires on the West Coast to hurricanes with high winds and flooding in the Southeast. And that's just in the US. Let us pray. Creator of life, at your word, the earth brought forth plants yielding seed and trees of every kind bearing fruit. The rivers, mountains, minerals, seas, and forests sustained life. The eyes of all looked to you to satisfy the needs of every living thing. And throughout time, the earth has sustained life. Through the planetary cycles of days and seasons, renewal and growth, you open your hand to give creatures our food in proper time. In your wisdom, you granted a Sabbath, a blessed time to rest in gratitude for all that you have given, a time to liberate ourselves from vicious consumption, a time to allow the land and all creatures to rest from the burden of production. But these days, our living pushes the planet beyond its limits. Our demands for growth and our never-ending cycle of production and consumption are exhausting our world. The forests are leached, the topsoil erodes, the fields fail, the deserts advance, the seas acidify, the storms intensify. We have not allowed the land to observe her Sabbath, and the earth is struggling to be renewed. During this season of creation, we ask you to grant us courage to observe a Sabbath for our planet. Strengthen us with the faith to trust in your providence. Inspire us with the creativity to share what we have been given. Teach us to be satisfied with enough. And as we proclaim a jubilee for the earth, send your Holy Spirit to renew the face of creation. In the name of the one who came to proclaim good news to all creation, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Great.
Okay, now.
That was a beautiful prayer. Thank you.
Okay, we are ready to, wait a minute, let me go back. Shoot, I forgot. I'm sorry, I forgot to optimize the video, and now.
So just stop sharing and start again.
Yeah, I see it now. The thing moved up to the top there. Okay, so here we go. Okay, oh, there it is. It doesn't show. It's not letting me optimize the screen sharing for video. I hope that, maybe let me put it on advanced. Does that let me do that? Okay, it's.
As long as you have the computer sound
Okay.
flag.
Let's go then. Oh, wait a minute, but now it didn't. There we are, okay.
I think we have the wrong, there we go.
Okay. Let's see, I'm sorry, I practiced it so much.
Don't
feel bad, Joe. Do you see it? Because I can't see it now.
Yes, we see it. It says Zoom, but you.
Yeah, we're seeing your Zoom session instead of your video.
You had it just about a second ago.
I'm so sorry, because I really.
Okay. That's okay.
It's not. Okay, there, wait a minute. Just, I can't. Darn it. I am so sorry. I had, okay, the third time is going to be the charm here.
Okay, Joan. Some of us are doing this 3 or 4 hours a day and we still make mistakes, so.
Yeah, that's right. There you go.
Okay.
I would suggest, as many spiritual directors and spiritual people in general, but especially those that are assisting others in spiritual growth, that one of the most important, if not the most important things that we can do to have equanimity, to have peace in the midst of chaos, to be in action and not be just totally overwhelmed by depressing, challenging, difficult times, is to really have our best understanding of reality, the reality of impermanence, the reality of mortality, the reality of death, and hold it in a sacred, meaningful, personal, and inspiring way. For a number of years, Connie and I used charts back before we had PowerPoint and Keynote and stuff like that. And this is one of the charts that we used whenever we did programs on a sacred science approach to mortality and death. We would take a look at the major sciences that have anything to do with death. Paleontology, evolutionary biology, embryology, cell biology, ecology, astronomy and astrophysics, geology and geography and math. And then we took a look at some of the major scientific discoveries in each of these areas that have helped us come to an understanding that there's not only nothing wrong with death, there is something profoundly right with death, that you can't have a universe without death. So here is a litany that religious congregations have used. I'm going to invite you to just respond with the refrain. When I do like this, you will all just ask, is this a universe we can say yes to? Stars are born and stars die. Along the way, these stars fashion the very atoms of our bodies. Mountains are born and mountains die. Along the way, these mountains create the particles of sand and clay that blend with dead plants to become soil. Glaciers come and glaciers go. Along the way, they grind rocks into new soil and sculpt ponds and lakes. Species come and species go. Along this odyssey of evolution, marvels emerge: eyes, limbs, feathers, song, terror, love. Cells are born and cells die. Along the way, the winnowing yields fingers and toes, fins and wings, and the miracle of healing from injury. Forests of cells are born and die, but not let go. Along the way, these ancestors' cells stiffen into wood of uncommon strength and endurance, allowing the living green cells to reach for the sky. Baby animals are born in abundance, and myriad plant seeds are cast to the wind. Along the way, most of these children become food, supporting the vast ecological web of life. Humans are born and humans die. Along the way, each may blossom with love and accrue wisdom as elders, and then by their passing make room for generations of children now and forevermore. Ideas are born and ideas die. Along the way, they nourish the human journey onward, inward, and outward in an arc of wonder that now embraces 100 billion galaxies. Love comes and love fades, dies, or endures. Along the way, we experience the richness of existence, sanctified by laughter and tears. Each of us is born and each of us will die. Along the way, our awareness of death urges us to live fully, to give fully, and to take not one moment for granted. Death is natural and necessary at every level of reality. And the ancients could not have possibly known this in the ways that we do. That's why it's so vital that we continue to honor reality, whether we use God language or secular language, that we honor reality in terms of ongoing revelation and not get frozen in time. Death is no less sacred than life. And thus, Good Fridays are consistently followed by Easter Sundays. This is my cosmic rosary. All right. It's called great story beads. I mean, they're called different things by different people, but each bead signifies some significant event in the history of everyone and everything. This is the whole universe story. I consider each of these a grace moment. And one of the things that we understand from the history of the universe is that one of the main things that drives evolution and complexity and transformation is chaos, breakdowns, and bad news. Turns out that nothing is more important than chaos, breakdowns, and bad news for catalyzing creativity, catalyzing transformation. And so again, this is seeing that death isn't a problem. Death is a necessity that when embraced can have life-changing import. In other words, Good Friday wasn't just something that happened to one God-man 2,000 years ago. It's a fundamental part of the nature of nature. The gifts of death. Mountains die, oceans die, continents die. Without the death of species, there would be no complex life. Without the death of fetal cells in the embryonic stage of development, we'd all be spheres. The reason we have shape is because cells died here, 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 and here. Without the death of plants and animals, there would be no food. I mean, this is obvious when we think about it, but we're just not used to thinking about death in a positive way. Without the death of stars, there would be no periodic table of elements, no planets, no life. Without the death of elders, there would be no room for children. I mean, think about it. In a finite world, if all you have is birth with no death, very quickly you're wall-to-wall people, wall-to-wall skunks, wall-to-wall bacteria, 60 feet deep. It doesn't take long. Death is essential on a finite planet. So without death, there would be no ancestors. Without death, time would not be precious. So what then are the gifts of death? The gifts of death are Mars and Mercury, Saturn and Earth. The gifts of death are the atoms of stardust within our bodies. The gifts of death are the splendors of shape and form and color. The gifts of death are diversity, the immense journey of life. The gifts of death are food, the sustenance of life. The gifts of death are seeing, hearing, feeling, deeply feeling. The gifts of death are the urgency to act, the desire to fully be and become. The gifts of death are joy and sorrow, laughter and tears. The gifts of death are lives that are fully and exuberantly lived, then graciously and gratefully given up for now and forevermore. Amen. Now that too has been used as a litany in various churches. What matters most, of course, is our legacy. Whatever has given your life meaning, whatever the thousands of things that have given your life meaning, the final meaning of your life is your legacy. And David Brooks talked about this in terms of the difference between an honorable death and a dishonorable death. David Brooks, back about 6-7 years ago, wrote a piece in the New York Times on death and budgets. He said, "We think the budget mess is a squabble between partisans in Washington, but in large measure, it's about our inability to face death and our willingness as a nation to spend whatever it takes to push it just slightly over the horizon. See, there are supernormal medical technologies that our ancestors never had to say no to, but many of us will have to say no to, otherwise this is the way we're going to die, because this is the default position. This is what all the incentives have to go, are moving us in. And what I sometimes say is, imagine that this guy here is like 85 years old. He had a great life. He had an amazing legacy. And in his last 7 months of life, he was kept alive like this, at the cost of 48 college educations. What's his net legacy? It's real mixed. Supernormal medical technology creates the physical suffering, emotional distress, family discord, and humongous societal costs. Until we grasp that death plays a vital and necessary role in an evolving cosmos, Christianity will be shackled by unnatural, otherworldly notions of the gospel. Medical technologies will continue to prolong physical and emotional suffering and provoke family discord. The medical industry will continue to underwrite the widening gap between the rich and the poor. And seniors and their families will continue to be seduced into perhaps the greatest generational injustice and legacy diminishing evil in history. A few years ago, Connie had this amazing vision of creating and trying to influence insurance companies, that those of us who have this kind of a view, those of us who don't see death as an enemy or as the problem, but as sacred, and don't want to be kept alive just because we have the medical technology to keep our organs alive, don't want to be kept alive that way. That we can actually work with this actuarial analysis such that, because one of the things we do is we don't feel good about saying no unless somehow we can be a blessing. So that there's a percentage that then goes for projects around the world, legacy projects, which then allow you to feel great about not having these life-saving technologies because there's already the insurance analysis. I've got several friends who think that Connie's idea is absolutely necessary. And so up on our website, thegreatstory.org, just /legacy.pdf is just a 4-page outline of that. So if you have any connections to the insurance industry or just even more curious about this, please check out that PDF. One of the things we do a lot is visit graveyards. In fact, literally 3 nights ago, we slept in a graveyard because we were driving from North Carolina and I wanted a nice dark place to sleep because there were no truck stops and you got these 75-mile-an-hour roads through Texas. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Am I gonna pull off the side here and try to sleep? So we found a nice graveyard to sleep in. And I love it because one of the things that we do religiously is we'll look at the gravestones. We didn't do this the other night, but we'll look at the gravestones and we'll see that it wasn't that long ago that a lot of women died in childbirth and a lot of children under the age of 5 died. And then I'll look at the tombstones and I'll read the dates. And one of the things I'll often say to myself is, you know, whatever this person may have believed about his or her soul or spirit or consciousness, you know, whatever it was that they believed continued after death, that helped them live a good life. I am just nothing but a bow of gratitude and respect to that practical truth wisdom that maybe helped them. But from the perspective of every life form in the universe, this person is everlastingly dead. And I am soon going to be just as everlastingly dead in terms of my body. This material existence. Our supremely natural destiny is everlasting death. And that doesn't mean that you can't continue to have whatever beliefs that you might have that inspire you. But in terms of your material existence, we're all going to be everlastingly dead soon. So that means, among other things, let's not put off our legacy work. Even if you're 90 years old, how you go through the dying process can be one of the most profound pieces of legacy that you ever contribute. A few years ago, there was a funeral director. This person told Connie, she says, I'm a funeral director intern and will be getting my license within the next couple of months. Every day I deal with death. Every day I hear sermons about Adam's sin and death's sting. I always feel strange sitting in the back, listening to whichever preacher happens to be the pick of the day. I always knew I didn't believe what they spoke. I learned about evolution on the Discovery Channel, but I never had it put into a story that could define me. It was always something distant, something that happened in the past. You brought to me the first creation story that I could relate to. No talking snake in a tree tempting a nude woman. No, you gave me words to a story that is based in fact, something I can make my own. Something that is my own, and for that, I thank you. One of our dearest colleagues in the religious naturalism movement, the sacred realism movement, is Loyal Rue, and I love this quote. Death is the entrance fee paid on exiting. Death is the entrance fee paid on exiting. 9 years ago, I went through a very serious bout of cancer, had a tumor the size of my fist in my spleen. And even when I was looking at the possibility that I could die in the next 8 months, and there was a period of about a month where we thought that was the case until the chemo worked, I had what religious people call the peace that passes understanding. And it wasn't because I was holding out hope for pearly gates and mansions when I die. I'm a sacred realist. I'm a religious naturalist. It seems to me pretty clear that where we go to when we die is the same place we came from before we were born. And whether you speak of that as coming from God and returning to God, or coming from mystery and returning to mystery, or coming from nothing and returning to nothing, I think all those are legitimate ways of talking about it. But as I sometimes say, and I'm not just joking, I mean this, if where I go to when I die isn't the very same place that all other plants and animals and bacteria have gone, I'm going to be pissed. I don't think we humans get to go to some special place that the rest of the living biosphere doesn't get to go to. And I am eternally grateful. A year later, I had this experience. My only granddaughter, at the age of 14 hours, on my chest, wrapped up with a baby wrap. One of the highlights of my life. So I mentioned before, Stephen Jenkinson, his documentary Grief Walker, Die Wise. I love this quote: "Not success, not growth, not happiness. The cradle of your love of life is death." Spiritual teachers and traditions talk about having your mortality always as your advisor. The life of the historians that really focused on not just history as understood as a linear like this or human-centered, but understood the patterns, the rhythms of history, and the commonality of how cultures become great and how they grow old and die. And so here are just some of the resources: The Collapse of Complex Societies by Joseph Tainter, Ronald Wright, A Short History of Progress, Collapse by Jared Diamond, The Fate of Empires by Sir John Glubb, I also recorded that, Technofix, and then these two, Overshoot, as I've mentioned many times already, and this book, Immoderate Greatness by William Ophuls. It's just a little 75-page book, but oh my gosh, is it fabulous. It sums up the kind of research that these historians have done in 75 pages. And then John Michael Greer, I cannot speak too highly about. John Michael Greer is our favorite author. I've actually recorded most of these books.
Okay, I just want to remind everybody that the goal in screening these videos has been to provide something that's maybe a little provocative as a springboard for discussion. Was there a theme or a takeaway or something that resonated with you here?
Well, I think of Tennyson's poem, The Brook. Men may come and men may...
You're muted, Barb. Did I? Somehow you got muted, I think.
Oh, I thought I unmuted.
There. It says unmuted. Okay.
So Barbara, can you just repeat that? I think the internet just cut out.
Oh. I'm reminded of Tennyson's poem, The Brook. Men may come and men may go, but I go on forever.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. And any other thoughts? I know he was a little all over the place here with this.
Well, what I was struck with was the really an urgency that I feel when I consider that, you know, I'm not going to be around for that much longer. So what am I going to do with, as Diane Lopez Hughes's email thing says, what are you going to do with this wild and wonderful life, or whatever the exact phrase is. So there's an urgency to do something with the time that I have. And then I also have a question that's, if things die and everything dies and there's, you know, like seasons of life and death and stuff, is how do we know when we should let something go and when we should champion for saving it something natural, maybe? Anyway, that's an esoteric question, I guess, but mainly it's that urgency that I feel.
Yeah, thanks. I think urgency was something that really...
I'm Gary. Both of my parents died from complications of Alzheimer's, and it was very painful to see the deterioration in their lives. And I don't know how, but I wish there was some way they could have been spared the pain and the anonymity and the despair of their own deaths. To see them deteriorate was very painful for me.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, that I think is something that we, Diane just posted in the chat, I don't know if everybody saw it, the medical field is getting better about having, I think, these more honest discussions, and I think that's helpful. Is there anything else? I want to save plenty of time at the end following the second video. So if there's anything else you'd like to say coming to this.
I'm just reflecting on sort of the tension between, I mean, I think I understood what he's saying about the value and the sacredness of death, but I also appreciate that it's such a tender thing to discuss, because the more that we see death as a gift, and even as it implies a certain urgency, the more it can create a kind of anxiety for, let me do all that I can right now, which I think is what drives the sort of desire to suck everything up right now, right? Which is, I think, the opposite of his point.
Do you mean sucking up resources, Jeff?
Yeah, sucking up resources. The man dying and living in his bed, trying to suck up every possible moment of life and extending life to create more moments of life by sucking up more resources. Or me wanting to suck up every natural resource I can to make the most possible use of every living moment I can, right? So there's kind of this tension. And I think there's a way to talk about it that I'm struggling to articulate right now that is perhaps not as focused on death as on just being present with enough in this moment. That requires also a peacefulness with death, which I think is what he sort of talked about, but I'm just struggling with that language a little bit.
The concept of everybody having a bucket list of things they want to do before they die does a disservice to the concept of passing to the next life, to deterioration of our bodies. It is egotistical and arrogant to think about all the things that we want to do before we die instead of preparing ourselves for the death itself. I don't know, it just occurs to me.
We could also talk about the presence of God, and I'm deriving great richness from reading in our Western Christian spiritual tradition material written by people who have had felt experiences of the presence of God, whether in prayer or worship or service to other people. There's a tiny little book that most of you probably know, Brother Lawrence's Practicing the Presence of God. We are assured that God is with us in life and through death, whatever that means. But it's really about love. It's about felt experiences of God's love that can be shared with others as we go through whatever transitions we have to go through.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was really, I think, beautiful and very helpful. And I actually think this whole discussion could use its own forum or forums. You know, a lot more to be said here. I would like to now give sharing the screen another try and move on to the second video, just so we have enough time for discussion at the end. And that's okay.
I just learned of this quote from the great deep ecology writer, poet, Gary Snyder, in his book, The Practice of the Wild. I love this quote. Our immediate business and our quarrel is with ourselves. It would be presumptuous to think that Gaia much needs our prayers or healing vibes. Human beings themselves are at risk, not just on some survival of civilization level, but more basically on the level of heart and soul. We are in danger of losing our souls. We are ignorant of our own nature and confused about what it means to be a human being. The first thing that I would offer is remember who you are. Remember that you are the universe becoming conscious of itself, that you are not separate from nature. You are not separate from the universe. Thomas Berry famously used to say that you can think you're alienated, you can feel alienated if your thinking is not aligned with reality, but you can't be alienated. We are life becoming aware of itself. We are nature becoming conscious of itself. Brian Swim has these two quotes that I love that help people capture this. He says, 4 billion years ago, the earth was molten rock, and now it sings opera. Earth was once molten rock, and now it sings opera. And nobody put anything here when the Bible, like Genesis 2:7, talks about God forming us from the dust of the ground and breathing into us the breath of life. That's a true story. It's a mythic way or poetic way of describing the fact that we grow out of the dynamics of the planet itself and its reality as a whole that makes that possible. I'm not sure how Moses could have written it any other way, assuming he wrote that. The other quote from Brian Swim that I like that's a little audacious, he says, you can sum up the entire history of the universe in 2 sentences. You take a great cloud of hydrogen gas and you just leave it alone. And it becomes rose bushes, giraffes, and human beings. Now, if that's not a sacred story, if that's not on par with any of our great creation myths, I don't know what is. So interpreting life mythically simply means interpret life personally. I act as if the universe is conspiring on my behalf. It's a practical truth. It's a spiritual practice that I do that allows me and helps me to live a better life and have healthier relationships. It's mythic. I interpret life conspiring on my behalf. And see, the interesting thing is that sometimes people will want to say, well, what's life really doing? Well, in a nested creative understanding where there are larger realities that you're part of and smaller realities that you're dependent upon, I don't think there's any way to know, in the sense of know rationally. And so acting as if the universe is conspiring on our behalf is just a really useful belief. And it's mythic. I celebrate it being mythic. Having a personal relationship. Connie and I personify almost everything. Because again, that's mythic. The nature of myth is to personify, to give human characteristics to what's more than human. So for example, what you call North America, we call Nora. We've got this intimate personal relationship with Nora. Angel is our van. Our relationship is Jasmine. There's Connie, there's Michael, and then there's Jasmine. And sometimes it's really clear what Connie wants to do, and it's really clear what Michael wants to do. But when one of us asks, what does Jasmine want? It allows me as a man to not be attached to my position. And I can go with something she might have suggested in the first place, but I don't think that she's won and I've lost. I feel good. I feel proud that I'm doing what's good for Jasmine. Now, why it is that Jasmine usually wants to do what she wanted to do in the first place, I haven't quite figured that one out, but a happy wife is a happy life, as they say. We sing in the morning, we sing to Great Soul. What most people in this room call the sun, we call Great Soul, S-O-L. And we sing, hi, hi, great soul, we love you so. And we sing the song. And then at night we sing, bye, bye, great soul. It's mythic, but it adds yumminess to our lives. So interpret life mythically. If there were one skill I wish I could impart to young people, like exercising a muscle, it would be to learn to interpret life mythically, generously. Because as most of us, by the time you're as old as we are, you realize that the primary determinant of the quality of one's life isn't what happens to them, it's how they interpret what happens to them. So when I talk about the big picture, here are some things that I find deeply inspiring. Joanna Macy, my great mentor, probably my most important, significant female mentor. There is science now to construct the story of the journey we have made on this earth, the story that connects us with all beings. Right now we need to remember that story, to harvest it and taste it, for we are in a hard time, and it is the knowledge of the bigger story that's going to carry us through. So the first thing that gives me inspiration from this perspective is that recognition that I am not separate from the universe, that I am nature becoming aware of itself, that sense of identity. It reveals the way, what the Chinese call the Tao, the way of life. It's the way of right relationship to reality. It's the way of accountability to the future. We recognize that primary reality is primary. This becomes obvious when you understand the epic of evolution, the history of the universe, big green history. we see that it's not religion or science. It's religion and science. Both are absolutely essential for the human endeavor. It turns out that religion and science are as necessary, as I said at the very beginning, that mythic language and secular language, secular and sacred language, are both as necessary as the two hemispheres of our brain. It helps us realize God in mythic language. Death is not only necessary, it's no less sacred than life. And we get this through this understanding of the epic of evolution. The spiral shape of history. History isn't just circular. Things don't always just come back to the same place. Nor is history merely linear. It's both. There's this spiral aspect. Yes, there's cumulative knowledge, there's direction, there's movement, but it also, we see these rhythms, the rise and fall of individuals, the rise and fall of civilizations. It's a spiral. It sacralizes ecology and evolution. These are sacred. If I were to say, what is my legacy work? What am I trying to do with my life? I'm trying to help plant the seeds so that whatever humans exist, whatever forms of humanity exist 100 or 200 years from now, they embrace ecology and evolution as holy. That the sciences of ecology and evolution are considered holy and meaningful and inspiring and are passed on in the same way that now religious people look back at the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or the Bible. The twin anti-future follies, perpetual progress or imminent collapse. This idea of perpetual progress or imminent collapse are the two least likely things that we'll experience. The notion of problems and predicaments. We get this through an understanding of the epic of evolution. Realistically inspiring visions. One of the things I did for actually 3 years was specifically focused on how this perspective can help us have realistically inspiring, not pie in the sky and the sweet by and by, but realistically inspiring visions of the future. And then finally, and most importantly perhaps, it sacralizes soil, forests, and water. These are sacred, these are sacramental. I believe that building topsoil and planting trees while nurturing community is perhaps the most holy work that we can be engaged in. In fact, this guy right here not only has worked with kids planting trees, but he was also one of the valve turners that spent 6 months in prison for shutting off the tar sands and waiting around to be arrested. Connie's been in this field of assisted migration, and I love this quote from Paul Hawken. I just rediscovered this about 8 months ago. There's a rabbinical teaching that says if you're told the world is ending and the Messiah has arrived, first plant a tree, then see if the story is true. Isn't that great? So remember the big picture and interpret life mythically. Practice the 5 L's. What do I mean by that? Love something, learn something, let go of something, laugh at something, and carry something forward, pass something forward, legacy. Love something green, love something non-human, love something that's part of life. It'll nurture your soul to do it. This past summer, I ended up tending to about 400 trees. I was caring for these trees throughout the summer, 1 day a week. I went down and cared for these 400 trees. It was nurturing. When you're afraid the whole world is going to hell in a handbasket, do something on behalf of life. It can keep you sane. Learn something. The last 6 years, I've been learning about the rise and fall of civilizations. I've been learning about ecology as the heart of theology. I've been learning about this stuff and then trying to pass that on. So learn something, let go of something. We can all downshift. We can all let go of things. We can all choose to use less energy, less stuff, less stimulation. We can all choose to keep the thermostat down a little bit in the winter, up a little bit in the summer, just to save a little energy. These are little things. They're not going to save the world. They're going to help save your soul. And then laugh at something. It's so important to keep a sense of humor. And then legacy. You have knowledge, you have skills, you have insights that can be passed on to a younger person. And there are few things more rewarding than mentoring someone in some way. And it can be simple. How to grow food, how to can food, how to preserve, how to sew, how to mend things. Whatever it is that you know or skills that you have, love something, learn something, let go of something, laugh at something, and pass something forward. Regularly commune with your ancestors and descendants. And yes, of course, imaginatively. Right? This is mythic. But we don't know of a single sustainable culture that didn't have a personal relationship with the ancestors and a personal relationship with the descendants, the future. It's our inability to do that that's causing some of the problems. Now, of course, the realization is that in many cases, the ancestors were who passed on the wisdom for how to live sustainably, how to live in right relationship to the future. So there was this sense of continuity. That's one of the reasons why you knew that when you died, that wasn't just the end of things. You then became an ancestor. Connie, when she does programs with kids, one of the things she asks, do any of you have a grandparent that has already become an ancestor? Notice how different that is. Do any of you have a grandparent that's already died? Kids will raise their hands. My grandma became an ancestor last year. In other words, it's that sense of continuity and communion with time, with the past, and with the future. Trust reality. I think this is a secular way of saying faith in God. Trust reality. Trust what's real. Accept what's so. Love what is. Accept what's real. These are all different ways of saying, okay, here's what's real. Now, what's possible? Living in that place of possibility. And celebrate impermanence. As I just shared, this program here, the necessity of an impermanence and death. What I shared here, our species is also mortal. We will not last forever. Whether we last another 50 years or another 5 million years, ultimately is not going to matter that much in terms of God's time, reality's time. I remember a quote, I'll probably butcher this up because I haven't recited this quote in a long, long time, but it was a bioregionalist, Jim Dodge. He said, most of the people that I talk with believe that we have a fighting chance to stop environmental destruction in 50 to 70 years and to turn the culture around in 800 to 1,000 years. He says, fighting chance translates as long odds, but good company. So let's start with the best style and spirit that we can muster, knowing that there's only a functional difference between the root and the flower. They're both a part of the same abiding faith. So dig in. So to honor your sadness and grief, climate grief, expectations grief, this is one of the things that they also know that we've also discovered, or you could say God, reality has revealed it through evidence about previous collapsing civilizations and contracting civilizations, is that the most difficult time is the time for those people who were born and grew up in times of carrying capacity expansion, where the economy was growing, there was more than enough resources, and then in their lifetime it shifted to contraction. And that's all of us in this room. The 20th century, the reason why techno-optimism is so inevitable for many people is that we all experienced it in the 20th century. Things did get better and easier and wealthier, and we lived longer lives. There was all of this. And so there was this natural expectation that problems, there's not a problem that can't be solved if we just throw enough energy and human inventiveness and human genius at it. So we have all these expectations. So that's why coming to terms with that we are now in catabolic collapse, 40 years in the United States of catabolic collapse, that is where things are contracting and things are and that liberal values tend to predominate in expanding times and conservative values tend to predominate in contracting times. And so understanding that allows us to deal with the grief, but then to be engaged, as Joanna Macy talks, active hope. And of course, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and then finding the gift. She didn't talk about this, Paul Trafurka talks about this, but finding the gift. What's the gift in this? Not just acceptance, but finding the gift. When I use the word Christian, I don't mean believing in anything. I mean being a savior of the future, a redeemer of humanity. This I consider pro-future or Christian or Christ-like prophetic activism. It is not just immoral. It is evil to irreparably harm the future for short-term personal or institutional gain. Yet we have a global economic system supported by governments on every continent and accepted by adherents of every faith, ensuring that it's not only legal to betray posterity, it's profitable. Highly profitable. So, how do we live? What do we do? And how should we confront what is anti-future and thus evil? In other words, how do we protest and non-violently, lovingly resist modern-day structural, organizational, and institutional, that is legal evil, One of the things we know about democracies that become plutocracies or oligarchies is that the playing field gets tilted so that we've got tons of laws that we can obey the laws and destroy the future. It's legal evil. This is a powerful quote from Teddy Goldsmith. It is an astonishing thought that we can completely destroy this planet, make it uninhabitable, and assure the extinction of our species and countless others without violating a single law. And I suggest to you that that is what Mahatma Gandhi was all about. That is what Martin Luther King Jr. was about. They were confronting systemic injustice, legal evil. I had my photo taken. This was at a church just outside of Atlanta. This is actually the picture on the cover of Martin Luther King Jr.'s autobiography. And he has a picture of Gandhi in the background. And this quote here says, "When your character is built on a spiritual and moral foundation, your contagious way of life will influence millions." I think we're seeing the return of prophets. Not prophets channeling an otherworldly entity, not prophets predicting the future, but prophets who see what's real, who sense what's emerging, and then speak a word of warning to the people that's basically, folks, we need to get right with God or else. We need to get right with reality or we're going to suffer, we're going to perish. I consider James Hansen a modern day prophet. For decades, he's been speaking prophetically on behalf of reality with unflinching authority. And now, he's regularly getting arrested. And when I say regularly and repeatedly getting arrested, I mean regularly and repeatedly. Now, why would one of the most prestigious, most respected scientists on climate in the world regularly get arrested? Well, he himself says why. It's because of his grandchildren. Storms of My Grandchildren is a fabulous book that he wrote on climate. This is the oldest alligator juniper tree in the world. It's a 2,000-year-old tree. If any of you saw the movie Only the Brave, it was about the 19 firefighters that died in the Yarnell fire. And a week before they died, they saved this tree. And I love this quote by Jonas Salk. Our greatest responsibility is to be good ancestors. The eyes of the future are looking back at us, and they are praying for us to see beyond our own time. They are kneeling with hands clasped that we might act with restraint, that we might leave room for the life that is destined to come. And again, the eyes of the future are looking back at us, not just human eyes, these eyes too. These concepts, great, good, bad, evil, they've always been defined in large part by how we impact the larger community and how that ripples out to the future. If I do something kind and generous and loving, and in some way beneficial to you or to others or the future, I've done a good thing, great thing. If I do something that's sacrificial, like if I sacrifice to be a blessing, I've done a heroic thing or an awesome thing. If I self-centeredly serve my own needs, screw others, to hell the future. I've done an evil thing. Good and bad have always been defined by how we impact the larger body in that future. And so this sense that the past is rooting for us, yes, of course this is mythic. This is not rational, this is mythic. But we can celebrate that and lift it up. If we act as if the past is rooting for us, we're going to have a better life and make a better future. So the past is rooting for us, and the future is calling us to greatness.
Okay, why don't we open to discussion, and what are your thoughts?
My name is
It's Debbie.
Debbie, and I just wanted to share something, and it's okay. Anyway, Gary, I have a very different experience with bucket list. My husband and I found out that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer last year in July. And the first thing we did was we made a bucket list. And on that bucket list were things like see my best friend in high school, have a family reunion, go to Oregon and be with family and friends. John had his saying that he wanted to have his farewell tour. We got everything done on that bucket list, and I am so grateful that we did, because we got a lot of new memories for me to have and hold on to. And one of the things that I liked in the first conversation was the openness to do what you need to do in the way that you need to do it. If you came from God, you're going to go back to God. If you came from nothing, go back to nothing. It's okay. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Debbie.
I'd like to speak to the same point, because now that I'm 70, and we've done this COVID lockdown, I must say that there are a lot of things that I've been putting off for years that I realize I've got to do. And there are things like communicate with distant relatives, write down family stories, call people that I keep thinking I will do and have been putting off and putting off. And I think that the whole thing with the threat of death, it does make us more alive. But because I come from a family where we've had people, where I've got 2 cousins that were 96, a great uncle that lived to 102, I've always felt like I had plenty of time. And now I'm thinking, maybe you don't. So I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be a bucket list, but I think there is an imperative to actually accomplish some things that I've been putting off.
Michael Dowd gives me so much potatoes and meat to chew on, it's almost impossible to deal with it all at the same time. I strongly suggest his book, Thank God for Evolution.
I was concerned when he started talking about legacy, because it felt to me like he was, especially when he said for people sort of on my other side of middle age, because I felt like he was adding to the anxiety that many of us suffer from chronically as we get older. And I was relieved when he came in this most recent video to saying mentoring can be your legacy, because I think there is that arc of life that at some point we have to stop striving for success or things and stuff, and move into that role of mentoring and take seriously our responsibility to the next generation. And that to me is much less stress inducing than thinking I've got to do something as I age.
I'm glad to hear you say that, Penny. I'm 9 years into retirement now, and the first years were awful because I still had all of that ambition, and where was it going to go? And now that the ambition is kind of settling down, and I am, maybe I could say, relaxing into mentoring.
I liked his idea of the spiral, when there's like the Nile, there's a coming and a going. And it reminds me of, to become a holy fool, so to speak, you have to not just ascend, but descend. And then the other quote that came to mind, of course, was from C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Reality is not neat, not obvious, or not what you expect.
Anita here. I wanted to make a comment that everything that's been talked about sounds so Native American. It's as though we are slowly coming into consciousness that Native American people have known and practiced, for eons.
Perhaps we could broaden that to Indigenous people in general.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. I think a couple of these thoughts, that living sustainably is living in right relationship with the future. And that feels to me a lot about very much like the 7 generations concern of some of our indigenous peoples around us, to make your decisions with the eyes on the generation 7th out. And I think that's really important and hard to do. You know, his concept that we're making choices that'll translate into how many college educations for somebody else. You know, that medical technology that we could choose for ourselves could have that implication for the future is staggering. And the last one I'm still grappling with is this whole notion that chaos and breakdown and bad news are spurs to creativity. I have a friend who believes that the current political turmoil is a way of cracking open so much that we have taken for granted and failed to examine fully. I think that is true. I'm struggling to think of it all as, you know, good news, as spurs to creativity, but I have to say, I think it is. I think discussions like this are some of those wild silver linings that we can see in this chaotic situation if we look.
Yeah, yes, thank you. We're going to need to end the discussion for now, just to leave a little time for Diane, our Simpler Living co-convener, to provide some closing remarks, and also for Jeff to tell us about next week's forum. So I'm going to turn it over to Diane now.
Thanks, Joan. I was thinking what Erica was saying was a perfect segue. If nothing else, Reverend Dowd has certainly helped us to more deeply consider the immediacy of climate disruption and a need for concrete, even life-changing solutions. While the lengthy time frame of COVID-19 has allowed us to think of many unforeseen ways we can navigate our lives, we have also been given an opportunity to restructure our priorities for the sake of the generations who will follow us. We can deepen our legacy to be even more life-giving than we ever realized. This fall, Simpler Living will be inviting Cathedral members to join us as we discuss and develop alternative lifestyles. I know that sounds weird, but that's what they are in this critical time. Please watch for more in the e-bulletin. And if you have any ideas you'd like to share with us, please contact us through our Realm Simpler Living page, or you can email Roberta Price or myself, Diane Lopez Hughes. And I want to thank you on behalf of all of Simpler Living and the Cathedral, if I might say, for walking with us on this journey this far. Thanks.